Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Benchmarks Symposium, a video series about Vidori's 2023 State of Promotional Review Benchmarks Report. I'm Annalise, Senior Manager of Marketing and Communications at Vidori, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Swearingen, founder and CEO of Tangerines Consulting. Anne, thanks so much for joining.
No, thanks. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Likewise, could you just quickly introduce yourself and tell the folks watching a bit about your background?
Sure. So I have my own consulting company. I've been in industry for 22 years, working at many large corporations, many different roles, and was fortunate to use Vidori in one of my roles. So I'm super excited to be here.
Likewise. Thank you so much again for joining. And, some of these other videos that we've done to date have been more deep dives on like specific elements of the data in this year's report. And I'm really excited to bring you in based on your expertise and background to like zoom out a little bit and talk a bit more about like these macro topics that are inherent throughout the report. They're woven in all of the data, but we're just excited to get your perspective. So let's start there. So one of the first things we talk about in this year's report is that agility in the material review process is paramount. And we say this for a few different reasons, right? It's showing up in the data. Review times are a bit longer this year. Job durations are a bit longer this year. And we know that the layer on top of that is economic conditions are impacting organizations. They're asked to be doing more with less. So teams are smaller. There are resource constraints. Budgets look a little bit different. And so that's showing up in the data this year and really is starting to have us, arrive at this thesis that agility is really important. And so I'm curious to get your perspective on that. Is that something you agree with, you disagree with? Have you seen this show up in, your experience in industry?
Yeah, no, agility is huge, right? And so when you're working on the other side, you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, or you're trying to be that market leader in bringing out that new material. And COVID pushed many companies into much more digital things like podcasts, like videos, like snippets on LinkedIn, like all these little things that when you record them and there's something that's not supported by your claims or things like that, it causes a lot of rework. And so there's a lot of work from the scripting side that has to happen ahead of time. And so the agility piece is definitely, and as you said, budgets are limited for marketing teams, right? And then you've got your MLR, medical, regulatory and legal reviewers on that who they're strapped as well. And so the more you can reduce rework, the better. So yes, agility, super important in this type of content.
Absolutely. And I think, we even saw, so one of the things in this year's report is we took a look at job durations by content subtype. And so you have something like a podcast, a webinar, a video, that's going to be on the longer end of the job duration. That's for multiple reasons. That content is often more laborious, right? There's a lot of things that go into creating that type of content, but it's kind of expected these days to be producing that type of content, have it be a foundation of your commercial strategy. And so what about that content in particular could you share in terms of like best practices? How can companies think about agility and this like digital content creation, knowing that a lot of companies are focused on developing this type of content and it's kind of expected in today's world?
It is. And so a lot depends on who your end audience is, right? And how deep from a reference standpoint you need to go, because the regulatory environment in many of these geographies, some of these geographies require us to get our content pre-approved by them, especially in the pharma space. May not necessarily be in the device space, but again, it depends on the jurisdiction that you're in. And so you've got to get it right the first time. And so being very planful, but that helps you, but it also reduces your agility because you have to have those references. You have to be able to say, where that data come from. If you want to say X is better than Y, well, where was the study, right? And so making it a big enough impact. And I know organizations are getting, hey, what's the ROI on this project? What's the ROI on this marketing piece? Taking a look at what impact you're looking to do, and is bigger better, or are snippets, lunch tidbits or things like that, better to go to? And where can you squeeze more out of less? So you really have to think outside of the box.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to your comment on being more planful, one thing that we often talk about, Vidori, is the MLR process is a process made of humans. And so one thing we often talk about is like for pieces of content like this, bring all of the key stakeholders into the fold. Have conversations about this might be something we're doing for the first time, or this is a little bit different than we've done in the past. Sort of that early buy-in can be so helpful in circumventing any problems that would show up perhaps in the review process and like provide a bottleneck or cause someone to have to do any rework. So does that resonate with you? What other things can organizations think about on the more like collaborative side that sort of feed into this agility concept?
Yeah, so a lot depends on the culture of the organization, right? And so if you're small and everybody's wearing multiple hats, you're trying to figure out, as I like to say, who's who in the zoo and what do they do, right? And if you're newer in putting Vidori in or putting Pepperflow in or a full system for content review, people are trying to understand their bounds. Like what's legal's bound? What's regulatory's bound? What's medical's bound in doing these reviews? And how do you work together? So things that I've seen be really successful, especially if you're doing a big campaign, with multiple pieces or things that are going to build, bring that group in early and get them in and get them involved because they'll get in quickly. Use an agency if you have to. Get the agency to do stuff. Pepperflow has got some awesome features in it where agencies can upload things, which frees up the company resources. Yes, there's a cost benefit, analysis that kind of has to be done. How much money can we spend? What can we do? But those are the things that definitely, if you bring them in early, then you've got folks already that know this, and then your reviewers are going to be more consistent along the way. And that consistency helps. The other piece that Pepperflow offers is those submitters can take a look and see who the bottleneck is and how they can help, right? Yep. And so there's power in just not only the metrics that you have in the benchmark report, but there's also tools that folks in industry can use to be able to say, hey, Ann, you know what? You're constantly at like 5 days on this, and our service level agreement internally is 3. Yeah. Have you set those things? Are people clear on their roles? So by just kind of getting everybody together and setting up the goalposts, this is what we want to do. This is how we need to do it. And, work together, definitely much more successful.
Yeah. Transparency, accountability. Yeah. And that's one of the, even as we talk about knowing about your process benchmarks is huge to understanding where are we at and where are we running into issues, because if you don't have an understanding of the process, how could you possibly work to improve it, right? And so that's one of the big things that we, as a data-driven organization, are often talking to a lot of our customers about. So it's really interesting to get your perspective there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's say an organization wants to be agile in their material review process, but they're still doing it via email, and they just can't seem to break out of that status quo operations for, conducting MLR review. What would you say? What would you tell them? How can, organizations introduce this concept of like software as being beneficial to the material review process if perhaps it's just been done a different way for so many years?
Yeah, change is hard, right? Like, and there's in a way 3 different things to think about with change. So okay. Having gone through change with systems a couple times, number 1, you've got to pay attention to the folks that are going to be like using the system, right? Like you got to talk into their what's in it for me, right? Like how they have to understand the benefit. And you're going to have those early adopters that are like, oh my God, this is awesome. I'm so buried in email, or I'm so buried in this old process that I can't wait to see something. And you get those people on your side. So they become your internal kind of quiet influencers.
Okay.
Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then you also have to have, though, a very clear path to be able to do this. There has to be clear steps on, are you going to go and bring this system in all at once? Are you going to do it by a business unit? Are you going to do it by a geography? And you have to be very planful because you need some wins and those small wins to be able to get the rest of the organization. You have to think about other things like translations. And pieces like that. So if your marketing organization is primarily English-based or French-based or Spanish-based or wherever they are, and they need to get content translated, how strict are you going to be? Does that need to have certificates all the time? Do you want them to recreate? Do you want them to beg, borrow, and steal? Right? And the last piece is really motivation. There has to be a drive, right? And so you can have the person that's putting it in, they understand it, but the folks that are going to resist are the ones, it's like moving an elephant. You can only do it so much before you're like, dude, I'm exhausted. I can't do this anymore. Right? And
Yes.
how do you motivate that elephant to say, follow the herd? Right? And you need to be able to say, you know what? 3 other business units are doing this. You guys are the last ones in. Let's go. Or whatever it takes. But following a set change management model like Cotter, like some of the other ones that are out there, does help with that. Focusing on the change, overly communicating the change, but you can see the benefit, but you got to get others to feel the benefit. So you have to tap into that frustration, because if they're not frustrated, they're not going to want to change.
So true. Yeah. The what's in it for me. If I'm not frustrated, then yeah,
I don't see, like, why? Well, it's
Right.
working well, right? It's like, I
Right.
got my little jam going on and I'm good.
Exactly. Well, I think one thing that's resonating for me in your comments is bringing other people into the conversation. Let's talk. What are the challenges that we're running into? Like, just talking to those that are involved in the process and sort of getting like, just pulling people in, I think helps with that change management, because then they're sort of, I'm part of it. I'm part of making this change, instead of being the change is just being told to you or asked of you, right? And so it's like incorporating and collaborating with people to bring about the change, I think, is like a through line in all of those sort of recommendations you have for organizations.
It's one of those things where it's like, if you could wave a magic wand, or do some pixie dust or something to say, what would the content review process look like in your ideal state? Okay, then we now have a goal. Now it's building the path. Now it's motivating the people to get there, right? And by bringing them in, they'll also see that there are other things that you're like, oh, that means I don't have to do that work anymore. Or, and they start to see benefits, and there just gets this snowball, that momentum effect. It's awesome. It's awesome to do.
Absolutely. Super helpful. Okay, the other thing I sort of wanted to ask you about and get your perspective on is this, and we've been touching on it a little bit, but people are asked to be doing more with less. So I think efficiency is something that we've heard both from our customers that are already using software, to those, that we're talking to that maybe aren't using our software. Doing more with less. We expect that this will continue into 2024. What would you guide people on? What are some best practices that you've seen work when it comes to efficiency and material review?
Bucket them. Sounds really crazy, but it'll work. So, for instance, meeting invites or conference announcements or things like that, you don't need everybody on them. Can you streamline it and it only goes to one person?
Okay. Yep.
And so, as an example, if you're saying, hey, and you want to do a Twitter, whatever they are now, post on, hey, come see us at booth 75.
Yep.
You don't need medical, you don't need regulatory, you just need legal, or
Yep.
get a whole bunch of those pre-approved. And so that way you can reuse them, right? Find out where you can skinny things down. Is your, what I like to call the beg, borrow, and steal. So if it's approved in English and all you're doing is verbatim translation to make it coherent, maybe you only need a regulatory reviewer in that country because legal's already looked at it, medical's already looked at it. And so how can you leverage the fact that it's gone through a whole cycle without pushing it through a whole other cycle? Especially if you want to do the same marketing campaign on like widget X, or whatever. When you're doing publication pieces and bigger pieces, those are going to be a lot more drawn out. And so try to do least burdensome, medium burdensome, and really heavy, and change it up a little bit that way. That's been super successful.
And you can see from even the reviewer's perspective how that might be helpful too, because then I'm in this mindset of, okay, this is this type of content, I'm going to review a handful of them. And so your brain is also efficient because you're not context shifting, right? And so it's not beneficial for not only for the initiator of that content owner, but for the reviewer as well. So everyone benefits from sort of that bucketing or categorization approach, for lack of a better word.
They do, right? And it's a painful process to get there because people are like, well, but everybody needs to see it. I'm like, well, do they? Because in organizations, we've gotten to this point of like, CCing everybody on things.
Sure.
Who really needs that? And that comes back to what I mentioned earlier. Do people know what their roles are?
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's really just a conference announcement, come see us at booth 75, medical and regulatory have really nothing to add to it, right? And it's legal only. Or are those legals just going to give a free pass? It's like, this is your approved statement, insert conference, and we're going to let you self-approve that.
Yep.
There's all kinds of ways to slice and dice it, but that's where Pepper Flow allows you to do that. And so getting organizations to change, as we discussed, but think outside the box to say, how risky is this? So you can use it on a risk profile to say, are we going to get, what's the ramifications if we get caught with this? Are we going to get sued on this or is there a lawsuit from a competitor because of something we said? So whether it's a risk profile, whether it's by content type, there's all kinds of ways to slice and dice, but both of those have worked very well.
Mm-hmm. That's super helpful. And it reminds me of this conversation I had with someone else on the content subtypes of when you're thinking about content review times and expectations, think about things like length, complexity, familiarity. Like it's not only thinking about sort of your position within the review process and what you're trying to achieve, but thinking about that other perspective as well, I think is important in order to like establish efficiency, because you need to help everyone out. It's not, it is a collaborative process. So thinking about everyone, I think, is an element to consider.
Yep. And the other thing I would add to that is a lot of organizations have these claim sheets or a claims matrix or something like that of things that are approved. Be wise when you create them and have 3 or 4 different flavors. It'll get things through faster. The sky is blue. Blue is the sky. You got to come up with some of those, because then that gives you 4 claims that aren't too risky, that are approved, because usually your claim sheet approvers are the same people that are approving your content.
Right.
Usually, right? Yeah. It's medical, it's regulatory, it's legal, right? And so leverage that, because if that's all tied in together and you're like, oh yeah, it's straight off the claim sheet, boom, 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 done.
Yeah. Well, that was a really exciting element we added to Pepper Flow this year, was a claims module where you can approve the claim and variations. So already you have people thinking about what are the 5 different ways that we want to talk about this, and just that like early buy-in, early consensus just helps with the whole content creation process, because then you can give your agencies, hey, here's a list of the 5 claims that we want you are approved to use. And then your agency feels empowered. That's a better content quality. So just thinking about these things early on just help the entire, life cycle of that piece of content.
Yeah, it does. You bring up the great point about agencies. When more complicated pieces are being used, bringing in, especially if you're going to be citing something in the medical literature, bringing in your medical team to partner potentially with the agency, with marketing, is super important, because if you've got a great medical team that's going to be looking at the claims, they need to understand all that literature that folks are looking at.
Sure.
Right. And if you're like, there's a claim in there, or there's something to say, well, this product heals wounds 25% more, and that's all you say, and there's a reference, you're like, I got to go check that, because that's a risk. Right. And so helping them understand a bit more will also make things much faster.
Awesome. Well, Anne, so much great stuff you shared today. I am so grateful that we were able to bring you on and talk about this. I think just having your unique perspective is always really interesting to us at Vidori. We love working with you. So thanks so much for joining.
Oh, anytime. If anyone's got questions, please reach out.
Awesome. And for everyone watching, please go download the 2023 State of Promotional Review Benchmarks Report. You can download it at vidori.com/2023 benchmarks, and follow us on LinkedIn. We're doing a whole series of videos within this series that I'm really excited about. So please follow us and join in on the conversation. Thanks and have a great day.